Objectives. Explain what is individualistic self. The importance of individualistic self. Individual needs come first, with the needs of individual being met before the needs of the collective. Self-sufficiency, or the ability to look after and care for oneself, ensures the group's well-being. The importance of independence and self-reliance is emphasized. People tend to psychologically and emotionally detach themselves from one person in general. Membership groups is a personal choice, but it is not necessary for a person's identity or success. Men and people who live in urban areas are frequently associated with individualist traits. Individualistic self. An individualist sense of self is defined more by who they are on the inside, minimizing the influence of factors, contexts, and people outside the individual. Individualists tend to communicate in direct styles. They say what they mean, prioritizing that information is conveyed explicitly and unambiguously. European and Western cultures are typically more individualist. So this means that the individualist concept of self is determined primarily by who they are on the inside, with the influence of factors, contexts, and persons outside the individual being minimized. Individualists want to communicate in a straightforward manner, saying exactly with what they mean and emphasizing the importance of conveying information in a clear and unambiguous manner. So this manner is more prevalent or common in European and Western cultures. The perception of self is fundamental to human behavior. It is rooted in interactions with others and in the seizing of meanings from interacting with one's social environment. According to Marcos and Kitayama, 1991, the roots of the individualism, collectivism, cultural cleavage can be found in fundamentally different perception of self. They distinguish the individualism as the independent self. The independent self derives its identity only from the inner attributes of the individual. These attributes are considered to reflect the essence of the individual, to be stable across time and context, and the combination of these attributes is seen as unique to the individual. These individual inner attributes are significant for defining, regulating, and thus predicting the behavior of an individual. So, what does it mean? It means that the independent self draws its identity solely from the individual's inner qualities. These characteristics are thought to reflect the essence of the person, to remain consistent through time and in different situations. And the combination of these characteristics is thought to be unique to the person. The independent self seeks to know him or herself through inner search of the introspective type. This independent self means that he or she wanting to know through thoughts and self-analysis and behavior. Importance of individualistic self. Let us know why individualistic self is important. Individualism is the freedom to do what we want as independent people. People are constantly bombarded into doing things that people in authority want them to do. It's important because if everyone was able to pursue their own goals, then we would have a stronger society as a whole. Individuality cannot work in this society because our structure is controlled by government, money, and law. Authority plays a role in desensitizing, spreading fear, and brainwashing people into believing that we have the right to terrorize other humans and animals. Authority infiltrates anything, ideologies, and standpoints it has onto others, and psychologically mollies them of the rights to think for themselves and act on their own will. You take authority and see how imperialistic it is, and understand that mankind is not free.
Collective self. The collective self consists of those aspects of the selves that are based on membership in social group of or categories. It refers to as perceptions of self as interchangeable exemplar of some social category rather than a perception of self as unique person. The identifications with social group. Those bonds do not necessarily require close personal relationship between group members. The collective self concerns are composed of attributes that one shares with memberships of the group to which one belongs. The group that include those aspects of self-concept that differentiate in group membership from members or relevant outgroups. Commonalities with groups may be based on stable characteristics such as risk, gender, or achieved states such as occupations or party memberships, no? So, naganta mong example. So, this image, this poor, beautiful girl. So, mga gwapa, nindot kay mga smiles. Nice smile. So, no? So, individual sila pag smile. So, sometimes na pag-smarty. So, sorry. For example, a person may hold a self-definition of being an environmentalist. So, when these collective self-aspects become relevant, Smarties other environmentalistics, a sense of responsibility for the environment, so are emphasized, whereas a unique characteristics of the persons, being honest, and so move to the ground. It is not initial for self-definition. That is individual close personal relationship with other environmentalities. So, as collective identity is based on the common identifications with a group of environmentalists. So, the collective self-concept comprise a characteristic that a person share with other environmentalities and different environmentalists from other people. So, ito, history. So, let's talk about history din sa pag-study, kinsa ga-study anang collective self, no? So, really the collective sense lang studyhan. So, let's talk about this to na. So, Jennifer Crocker and Rhea Lutanin were the first study collective self-systems. Kung kanang duha si Jennifer Crocker and si Rhea Lutanin were the first study collective self-systems. So, sila kanang duha ang first study sa ilang self-systems. So, they believed there was a relationship between people and self-systems will be more likely to react to threats to collective self-systems by delegating out groups and enhancing the in-group. The out-groups enhancing the in-group. So, the idea of collective self-system arose out of social identity theory. Social identity theory focus. So, social identity theory focus on individual personal beliefs about themselves and beliefs that stem from the groups they're part of. So, collective self-esteems describe a more group-oriented idea of self-esteems and in-group bias. It was published in Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and Crocker developed a scale that consists of 4 categories to measure collective self. So, nakunayupat kang categories to measure collective self-esteem. So, these four categories, one is sa self-esteem sa 4 categories. So, one, private collective self-esteem. So, it means positive evaluation from one group. 2, membership esteem. So, how one sees themselves in a group. Are they good a member? Tanaw na ang isa ka membro, good na ba para nila? So, membership esteem. So, third, public collective self-esteem. So, how the group one belong to is evaluated by the others. Dun sa pag-evaluate nilang laing grupo. Sino ba? So 4, kay important to identity. How important membership in group is to self-concept. So first of all, mas tindot magtinabangay kita ninyo. So no, pero na ibang individual. So lilahi tagkuan tan-aw la smarta or lilahi tag pananaw nila. So sometimes we need to teamwork as sa group mo. Cooperation dito sa atong grupo dito maglilahi na the group is very important. So mao nang gihimo na group para magtinabangay na i-share jud unsa inyong ideas, dili jud ipagkaan ma kamo jud sa grupo, share your own idea jud. So importance of collective self. So a variety of behaviors and conditions can be predicted from elements of collective identity. So the collective itself has been linked to individual reactions and behavior towards other people, especially towards members of other groups. So it plays an important role in group perceptions and behavior. For example, prejudice entire group and stereotyping and maintaining a positive social identity. So collective self-esteem by establishing powerful comparison between their own groups and out-groups members and relative to in-group members. It has been found that the mere act of categorizing oneself as a group members is sufficient to lead people evaluate in-group members more positively than others, to allocate more rewards to members of group. So elements of collective self also predict outcomes into the label. For example, collective self-esteem is related to physiological well-being. So higher or satisfactions with life or lower depressions, hopelessness and burnout. So furthermore, there's evidence relationship between ethic and more specific. So, no? So,
good day everyone, I am Sheena Bichoni Pumusino, and today I am going to tackle the individualistic culture and the collectivistic culture. So our learning objectives are to define culture, to differentiate the individualistic culture and the collectivistic culture, and to identify the Westerners culture and the Asian or the Eastern culture. So what is culture? Culture informs how we understand our relationship and interact with other people. It is one factor that can have an influence on how people think and behave. Okay, so it contributes on people's thought and behavior, as well as when cross-cultural psychologists conduct studies about the differences between the individualistic culture and the collectivistic culture. One factor involved is culture. So one interesting phenomenon that cross-cultural psychologists have observed on how people in individualistic culture describe themselves compared to how collectivistic culture describes themselves. People from individualist culture have self-concepts that are more focused on independence or their individuality rather than interdependence or their interaction with other people. As a result, they tend to describe themselves in terms of their personal unique characteristics and traits. For example, a person from individualist culture might say, I am analytical, I am sarcastic, I am genius. So the way he or she describes himself is from within characteristics. He or she describes herself or himself in a way that she knows who she is. This contrasts with self-description from a person in collectivist culture who are more likely to say that I am a good friend, I am a loyal girlfriend, I am a devoted wife. So the way he or she describes herself is from the outside characteristics, like the characteristics that other people see her as her. So analyze carefully my given example and you'll be able to differ how the two individuals differ the way they describe themselves. So individualism values personal independence. Within individualist culture, people are more likely to see themselves as separate from others, define themselves based on their personal traits, and see their characteristics as relatively stable and unchanging, whereas collectivism values personal interdependence. In collectivist cultures, people are more likely to see themselves as connected to others, define themselves in terms of their relationship with other people, and see their characteristics as more likely to change across different contexts. So, individualism is relatively stable and unchanging, whereas collectivism is more prone to vary across contexts. Several studies show that Westerners, for example, talk more about their personal attributes when describing themselves, while Asians in general talk their social role or the social interactions that invoke certain traits that they considered beneficial for themselves. Self-evaluation differs as well, with Americans emphasizing their own accomplishments while Asians prefer to keep a low profile, since self-promotion can be perceived as boastfulness. Western culture is what we call the individualistic culture, since it focuses on the person. Asian culture, on the other hand, is called a collectivistic culture, as group and social interactions are given more importance than individual needs and wants. A few common characteristics of individualistic cultures include individual rights take center stage. So people often place a greater emphasis on standing out and being unique. Independence is highly valued. People tend to be self-reliant. So they are able to do things and make decisions by themselves without needing the people's opinions or help. This contrasts with collectivist culture's common characteristics: self-sacrificing, so meaning decisions are based on what is best for the group. Dependable, so working as a group and supporting others is essential. Helpful to others are of greater importance. So they put greater emphasis on common goals rather than individual pursuits. Cultural differences also influence the motivation to either stand out or fit in with the rest of the group. Remember this. Just because someone's cultural background is individualist, you shouldn't assume that they are. Everyone falls somewhere on the individualist collectivist spectrum. Even within a very collectivist culture, you will find people who are more individualist. Furthermore, psychology research has shown that people shift along this spectrum, leaning more collectivist or individualist depending on the situation. This adaptability is more common in multicultural communities. For an instance, the culture in the Philippines is a combination from East and West. So Filipino identity was primarily created from prehistoric cultures, colonial influences, and foreign traders intermixing and gradually evolving. It's partly why we seek intercultural exchange, to adopt multiple cultural frames and learn to apply them in relevant communities and circumstances or situations. So that's all for my discussion today, and I hope you learned something. Thank you.
Hey everyone, our given topic is the self is a product of modern society among other constructions. There are two sociologists that explain well about this topic: George Herbert Mead and Charles Horton Cooley. They believe that our sense of self is not based on some internal source of individuality. Rather, we imagine how we look to others, draw conclusions based on their reactions to us, and then develop our personal sense of self. In other words, people's reactions to us are like a mirror in which we are reflected. We live in a mirror image of ourselves. The imaginations people have of one another are solid facts of society. The self or self-idea is truly social. It is not an expression of internal essence of individual or of individual unique psychology which emerge as the individual matures. So basically, this projection defines how we feel about ourselves and who we feel ourselves to be. The development of self, therefore, involves three elements in Coley analysis. First is the imagination of our appearance to the other person. Second is the imagination of his judgment of that appearance. And lastly, in some sort of feeling such as pride and mortification. On the other hand, George Horton Coley described the self as a product of social interactions and that the self defines itself through the looking glass, in which the person subconsciously copies the traits of the other people who he interacts with. According to the sociologist Coley, one of the pioneering contributors to Social's perspective on self-development was the American Charles Horton Coley. So, Coley asserted that people's self-understanding is constructed, in part, by their perception on how others view them. A process termed the looking glass self. According to Charles Horton Coley, we base our image on what we think other people see. We imagine how we must appear to others, then react to this speculation. We wear certain clothes, beautify ourselves to make unique, prepare our hair in a particular manner, wear makeups, use cologne, and the like. All the notion that our presentation of ourselves is going to affect how others perceive us or view us. We expect a certain reaction, and if lucky, we get the one we desire and feel good about it. On the other hand, for sociologist George Horton Coley describes the self as a product of social interactions and that the self defines itself through looking glass. For George Herbert Mead, sociologist George Herbert Mead believed that people develop self-images through interactions with other people. So basically, he argued that the self, which is the part of the personality consisting of self-awareness and self-image, is a product of social experiences. So basically, we reflect ourselves as the other reflects us, as we reflect ourselves as the other view us.
John Baudrillard's theory. He explained that the self may be the never-ending search. From the word never-ending, it means infinite. He stated that in the post-modern society, we develop our identity through privileges or prestige. It means that an individual develops a certain identity through real-time life experiences. In the current era, individuals are influenced by the mass media that made them acquire goods for social status than for value and utility. A good example for this are the streamers or vloggers. Because through social media, they're able to build a good status and respect from the viewers by doing some entertaining stuff that is related to the specific subject matter. Lastly, he stated also that in this generation, we can never be satisfied unless we have the upper hand in everything. Like for example, the people that participated in certain election just to have access to everything and rule the community and just to have money that should be for the community. So to link this theory, I think the satisfaction of a person is involved in the never-ending search because, for my opinion, personal satisfaction can only be attained when the individual senses the measure of fulfillment in this world. So that's why it is a never-ending search because we can't tell the measure of satisfaction of the individual has. Last theory from Gary Lazuna's theory. He stated that technology are arising. Information is gathered faster and communication may be done even if you're far from each other. In the current era, we're experiencing the Gary Lazuna's theory about. It also stated that you can choose your identity freely and no longer be restricted by the customs and traditions. It means that by the time passes by, the custom and tradition are slowly faded in implementation due to the influence of arising of technologies in the community. But because of being free, some may tend to detach themselves from others because of incompatibility. The rise of discrimination and inhumane. In terms of rise in technology, people lost contact with others because of social media. Some may be physically present but mentally or consciously absent because we tend to face up our gadget instead of the person. So because of that, people nowadays lack of real activities and close contact. In addition to this information, people or sometimes we tend to say that change is constant. It means that it is a dynamic effect that the things, environment, or even the person changes over time. So we can relate that in our current era, some customs or traditions that in the past are no longer accepted in the present era. So that means the theory about from the Gary Lazuna's theory. For the overall summary of the self is a product of modern society among other constructions that the self is the essential representation of our real-time experiences, and I think we can't avoid the development of some identity because individuals tend to have different and unique identities in terms of environment or things implemented towards society. And that's all for today. Thank you for listening.
The self is a product of modern society among other constructions. For two sociologists, George Herbert Mead and Charles Horton Coley, the self is a resulting product of the social interactions of a man. The person's self is dependent on the things which happen to him or her in life, which includes interaction with others. Society, through its particular culture, customs, institutions, and more, provides us with the labels we use to categorize the people we encounter. These labels are based on beliefs about race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, economic class, and more. We begin to learn our culture, the ways of our society, just after birth. Our culture shapes the way we work and play, and it makes a difference in how we view ourselves and others. It affects our values, what we consider right and wrong. This is how the society we live in influences our choices. But our choices can also influence others and ultimately help shape our society. Self as a product of modern societies. Jerry Lanosa and Jean Baudrillard, they said that the self is a product and is continuously being affected by the postmodern societies. There is freedom, but the freedom is there, that some problems may arise due to the freedom. For Jerry Lanosa, he said that the personality of a person or the self can be freely chosen by the people of modern societies, not affected by culture and any other factors. Freedom is emphasized for Jean Baudrillard. The self is a product of postmodern societies in which the person follows a rule that he has to go in accordance to the prestigious symbols that the society consumes. Sociological theories of the self. Sociological theories of the self attempt to explain how social processes such as socialization influence the development of the self. One of the most important sociological approaches to the self was developed by American sociologist George Herbert Mead. Mead conceptualized the mind as the individual importation of the social process. Mead presented the self and the mind in terms of a social process as gestures are taken in by the individual organism. The individual organism also takes in the collective attitudes of others in the form of gestures and reacts accordingly with other organized attitudes. Psychology of the self. The psychology of the self is the study of the cognitive or affective representation of one's identity. In modern psychology, the earliest formulation of the self derived from the distinction between the self as I, the subjective knower, and the self as me, the object that is known. Put differently, let us say an individual wanted to think about their self as an analytic object. They might ask themselves the question, what kind of person am I? That person is still, in that moment, thinking from some perspective, which is also considered the self. Thus, in this case, the self is both what is doing the thinking and also, at the same time, the object that is being thought about. It is from this dualism that the concept of the self initially emerged in modern psychology. Current psychological thought suggests that the self plays an integral part in human motivation, cognition, affect, and social identity. Coley. In 1902, Charles Horton Coley created the concept of the looking glass self, which explored how identity is formed. The looking glass self is a social psychological concept created by Charles Horton Coley in 1902. It states that a person's self grows out of society, interpersonal interactions, and the perceptions of others. The term refers to people shaping their identity based on the perception of others, which leads the people to reinforce other people's perspective on themselves. People shape themselves based on what other people perceive and confirms other people's opinion of themselves. There are three main components of the looking glass self. First, we imagine how we must appear to others. Second, we imagine the judgment of that appearance. Finally, we develop ourselves through the judgment of others. In hypothesizing the framework for the looking glass self, Coley said the mind is mental because the human mind is social. In other words, the mind's mental ability is a direct result of human social interaction. Beginning as children, humans begin to define themselves within the context of their socializations. The child learns that the symbol of his or her crying will elicit a response from his or her parents, not only when they are in need of necessities such as food, but also as a symbol to receive their attention. George Herbert Mead describes the self as taking the role of the other, the premise for which the self is actualized through interaction with others. We begin to develop an identity about who we are, as well as empathy for others. An example of the looking self concept is computer technology. Using computer technology, people can create an avatar, a customized symbol that represents the computer's user. For example, in the virtual world Second Life, the computer user can create a human-like avatar that reflects the user in regard to race, age, physical makeup, status, and the like. By selecting certain physical characteristics or symbols, the avatar reflects how the creator seeks to be perceived in the virtual world and how the symbols used in the certain of the avatar influence others' actions towards the computer user.
Hey, good day everyone! By the way, I'm David Carl Enverano. So, today let's tackle about the self is the product of modern society among other constructions. So, before we start, let's have a small recap. what is society? So a society or a human society is a group of people involved with each other, or a group of people living as a community or an organized group of people for a common purpose. According to Jerry Lanuza's theory, he stated that technology nowadays are arising information started faster and communication will be done even you're far away from each other. In this current era, we are now experiencing the Jerry Lanuza's theory. According to Jerry Lanuza, there is two societies. So the first is modern society. He stated that the attainment and stability of self-identity is freely chosen. It is no longer restricted by customs and traditions. So, what is modern societies? Modern societies, when society is industrialized, it is considered to be modern society, or it can be defined as people living together in current time. There are characteristics in modern societies. First is advanced industry and technology. It is also called post-industrial society, having highly complex and advanced industrial and technological systems. Second, urbanization, or this is a model of urbanization. So what can you say about urbanization? So urbanization is many towns, residential areas, established buildings, furnitures, many, so that you can call this city or urbanization or cluster of societies like that. Or high population pressure, a very large population, or overpopulated, or having millions of people in cities. Has a high population pressure. So next is what is self-identity? So as you can see, self-identity is how you identify and define yourself. It is your perception of specific and selective traits, qualities, abilities, and characteristics that present you. So what is customs and traditions? A custom, or called a tradition, is a common way of doing things. It is something that many people do and have done for a long time. Usually the people come from the same country, culture, or religion. Usually they do not know when the custom started. So here are the examples of the so-called custom or tradition. First is ceremonies, a bowing to elderly people, yes, or it's okay to burp while eating food, right? And that is customs and traditions. And second, it is the postmodern societies. So, postmodern societies, self-identity continuously charged due to the demands of multitude of social contexts, new information, technologies, and globalization. So, what is postmodern societies? So, postmodern societies or postmodernity is the state or condition of being postmodern after or in reaction to that which is modern. As in postmodern art, modernity is defined as a period or condition loosely identified with a progressive era.